November 17th, 1944, 1340 hours. The eastern approaches to Manderlay, Burma. A Japanese Type 3 Chi-Nus medium tank, pride of the Imperial Japanese Army's armored forces, rolled confidently through the monsoon-muddied terrain. Its commander, Lieutenant Takeshi Yamamoto, had studied American armor tactics extensively. He knew the M4 Sherman's 75mm gun. He knew its penetration capabilities. He knew that at 800 yards, his Chi-Nus frontal armor could withstand a direct hit. What he didn't know was that the tank moving into position 900 yards to his left wasn't carrying a 75mm gun. It was carrying a British 17-pounder, a gun that could punch through 140mm of armor at 1,000 yards. The Sherman Firefly had arrived in the Pacific Theater. At 1341 hours, Lieutenant Yamamoto's tank ceased to exist. The armor-piercing round didn't just penetrate, it turned the Chi-Nus interior into a pressure cooker of superheated metal fragments traveling at supersonic speeds. Japanese tank doctrine, carefully developed over 3 years of Pacific warfare, had just become obsolete in 1.2 seconds. The weapon that would revolutionize armored warfare in the Pacific had never been intended for jungle combat. The Sherman Firefly was born in the hedgerows of Normandy, designed to counter German Tigers and Panthers. But in late 1944, Allied intelligence reports from Burma revealed a disturbing development. Japan had finally produced a medium tank that could challenge American armor on relatively equal terms. The Type 3 Chi-Nus represented Japan's most advanced tank design to reach production. Armed with the Type 3 75mm gun derived from the Type 90 field gun, it could penetrate 75mm of armor at 1,000 meters. More critically, its own frontal armor, 50mm at 15 degrees, could resist the American M4 Sherman's standard 75mm gun at combat ranges exceeding 500 yards. For the first time since Guadalcanal, American tank crews faced an opponent that required tactical finesse rather than simple firepower superiority. Allied tank losses in Burma during October 1944 had increased by 34% compared to previous months. The 3rd Carabiners, a British tank regiment operating M4 Shermans, reported 3 tanks destroyed in a single engagement near Make Tila on October 23rd. Post-battle analysis revealed all 3 had been hit by high-velocity 75mm rounds at ranges exceeding 600 yards, ranges where return fire from American 75mm guns proved ineffective. The solution arrived at Calcutta's port facilities on November 3, 1944. 12 Sherman Firefly tanks, officially designated Sherman 1C or 5C depending on hull type, had been diverted from European operations. These weren't standard Shermans. The distinctive elongated barrel of the British 17-pounder gun extended nearly 3 feet beyond the standard Sherman's 75mm. The gun itself was a masterpiece of British ordnance engineering, originally designed as an anti-tank gun in 1942. Technical specifications documented in Royal Ordnance Factory records revealed the Firefly's revolutionary capabilities. The 17-pounder fired a 17-pound or 7.7 kilogram armor-piercing shot at a muzzle velocity of 2,900 feet per second. At 1,000 yards, it could penetrate 140mm of homogeneous armor plate. The Chi-Nus' maximum armor thickness was 50mm. The mathematical reality was brutal. The Firefly could destroy any Japanese tank in service from ranges where Japanese tanks couldn't effectively return fire. But mounting this powerful gun in the Sherman's turret had required extensive modifications. The gun's recoil was tremendous, necessitating a redesigned recoil system. The turret interior had been reconfigured. Reducing the crew from 4 to 5, the loader's position was eliminated, with the commander assuming loading duties. Ammunition capacity dropped to 77 rounds compared to the standard Sherman's 97. But each round carried exponentially more destructive potential. The tanks were assigned to the 7th Light Cavalry, an Indian Army armored regiment that had been operating in Burma since early 1944. The regiment's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Whitfield, recognized immediately that these weren't simply better tanks. They represented a fundamental shift in tactical possibilities. For 3 years, Allied armor in the Pacific had relied on numerical superiority and infantry support to overcome Japanese defensive positions. The Firefly offered something different: the ability to destroy enemy armor before it could effectively engage. Training began immediately at the Ranchi training grounds. Crews discovered the 17-pounder's quirks quickly. The gun's tremendous recoil made rapid fire nearly impossible. The entire tank would rock backward with each shot. The muzzle blast created a massive dust signature that revealed the Firefly's position instantly. Most critically, the long barrel made maneuvering in jungle terrain treacherous. British tank doctrine in Europe had developed specific tactics for Firefly employment, but jungle warfare would require new approaches. November 12, 1944. The 7th Light Cavalry conducted live-fire exercises against captured Japanese tanks positioned at various ranges. The results exceeded even optimistic predictions. At 1,200 yards, a range where Japanese tanks couldn't accurately return fire, the Firefly's first shot penetrated clean through a captured Chi-Nus frontal armor, exited through the rear plate, and continued another 50 yards before striking the ground. The armor-piercing round had encountered so little resistance that it barely deformed. Gunnery Sergeant William Davies, a veteran of North African campaigns now training Indian Army crews, documented the engagement in his training report. The 17-pounder doesn't just penetrate armor, it obliterates it. The entry hold is clean, but the interior damage is catastrophic. Spalling alone would kill everyone inside, but the shot typically continues through multiple internal components before exiting. Japanese tanks aren't built to withstand this kind of kinetic energy. The psychological impact on Japanese tank doctrine would prove as significant as the physical destruction. Since 1942, Japanese armor tactics had evolved around the understanding that American tanks, while numerous, weren't significantly superior in one-on-one engagements. Japanese tank commanders had developed aggressive tactics: close rapidly to negate American numerical advantages, use terrain to achieve ambush positions, and accept calculated risks, knowing that Japanese guns could penetrate American armor at typical combat ranges. The Firefly invalidated every assumption in that doctrine. Japanese intelligence reports from Burma, intercepted and decoded by Allied signals intelligence, revealed growing confusion. A November 8th report from the 14th Tank Regiment noted, "Enemy has deployed new tank variant with extended gun barrel. Engagement range appears to exceed our capability to respond effectively. Request technical assessment and tactical guidance." That guidance never came. Japanese military intelligence, already struggling to process information from collapsing fronts across the Pacific, couldn't immediately determine what they were facing. Some analysts theorized the British had mounted naval guns on tank chassis, technically accurate, as the 17-pounder derived from anti-aircraft gun designs. Others suggested American 76mm guns, not realizing the Firefly's weapon was far more powerful. The first combat deployment came sooner than planned. On November 15th, Japanese forces launched a counterattack against Allied positions near Shuebo. Intelligence reports indicated at least one company of Chi-Nus tanks would support the assault, the first confirmed deployment of Japan's new medium tanks in Burma. Lieutenant Colonel Whitfield made an immediate decision: commit the Fireflies to combat despite incomplete training. 4 Sherman Fireflies moved into defensive positions along the Shuebo-Yeyu Road on November 16th. Each tank was positioned in a carefully prepared hold-down position, with only the turret visible from the expected Japanese approach routes. Standard M4 Shermans formed a second defensive line 400 yards behind the Fireflies, positioned to provide supporting fire and create the illusion of typical American defensive deployment. The tactical plan, documented in the 7th Light Cavalry's operations order, was elegantly simple. Fireflies will engage enemy armor at maximum effective range, targeting command vehicles first. Standard Shermans will not engage until enemy armor closes to within 500 yards, maintaining deception regarding Firefly capabilities as long as tactically feasible. November 17th, 13:44 hours. The Japanese attack commenced with an artillery barrage that lasted 12 minutes. When the guns fell silent, reconnaissance elements reported movement along 3 approach routes. The main effort appeared to be developing along the central road, exactly where intelligence had predicted. And leading that advance, moving with the confidence of crews who believed themselves in technically superior vehicles, came 6 Type 3 Chi-Nus medium tanks. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The British gunner in Firefly, call-signed Lancer II, acquired his target at 1346 hours. Through his telescopic sight, he could see the lead Chi-Nus clearly at 920 yards, well beyond effective range for the Japanese tank's return fire. The target was moving at approximately 8 miles per hour, presenting a slight angle as it negotiated a curve in the road. The gunner, Havildar Singh from Punjab, had fired exactly 17 practice rounds during training. This would be his 18th shot with the 17-pounder. He squeezed the trigger at 1347 hours and 12 seconds. The Sherman Firefly rocked backward violently, dirt and debris exploding from the muzzle blast. Through the dust cloud, Singh maintained sight picture long enough to see the result. The armor-piercing round struck the Chi-Nus turret ring at a slight downward angle. The kinetic energy, over 2 million foot-pounds at impact, didn't just penetrate the 50mm armor, it punched through like paper, the hardened steel shot continuing through the fighting compartment at supersonic velocity. Inside the Chi-Nus, the crew had approximately 0.003 seconds of awareness before death. The shot itself created a pressure wave that ruptured internal organs. Spalling, fragments of the tank's own armor blown inward at lethal velocity, filled the crew compartment like shrapnel from a grenade. The ammunition stowage, compromised by the penetrating shot, detonated 3 seconds later. The turret, weighing nearly 2 tons, lifted 15 feet into the air before crashing to earth 20 feet from the burning hull. The remaining 5 Chi-Nus commanders witnessed their lead tank's destruction with incomprehension. Japanese tank doctrine had no framework for understanding what had just occurred. The engagement range exceeded anything in their tactical manuals. The violence of the kill, the turret literally blown off the hull, suggested ammunition detonation. But the initial penetration had come from a single shot at a range where return fire should have been impossible. Lieutenant Yamamoto, commanding the 2nd Chi-Nus, made a decision that would have been tactically sound against standard Shermans: advance rapidly to close the range gap. At 600 yards, his Type 3 75mm gun could reliably penetrate American armor. He needed to cover 300 yards as quickly as possible. He ordered his driver to accelerate to maximum speed, approximately 15 miles per hour on the muddy road. At 1348 hours, Firefly Lancer IV engaged Yamamoto's tank at 870 yards. The shot struck the glacis plate, the sloped frontal armor, at a slight angle. The 17-pounder's tremendous velocity meant even the angled impact provided insufficient deflection. The round punched through, continued through the driver's compartment, through the engine firewall, and detonated the engine's fuel system. The Chi-Nus became a fireball in less than 2 seconds. No crew members escaped. The Japanese formation, now having lost 2 tanks in as many minutes to an invisible enemy firing from impossible ranges, began to break formation. Individual tank commanders made independent decisions. Some attempted to reverse. Others tried to identify firing positions. One accelerated forward in what may have been a deliberate suicide charge toward the suspected enemy positions. The 3rd kill came at 1349 hours, the 4th at 1350. By 1351 hours, 5 of the 6 Chi-Nus tanks were burning hulks. The 6th tank, commanded by a veteran sergeant who had fought in China since 1937, attempted something desperate and tactically brilliant. He drove directly into a dense bamboo grove, using vegetation to mask his movement, hoping to close to knife-fighting range where Japanese gunnery skills might provide some advantage. He almost succeeded. The Chi-Nus emerged from the bamboo at 380 yards, well within its effective range. The commander had a clear shot at a Sherman Firefly's flank. In a conventional engagement against standard M4s, this would have been a kill shot, but the Firefly's gun traverse was faster than the Chi-Nus commander anticipated. At 1353 hours, the final Japanese tank died at point-blank range. The 17-pounder shot passing completely through the tank from side to side, the exit hole twice the diameter of the entry wound. The entire engagement had lasted 7 minutes and 40 seconds. 6 Type 3 Chi-Nus medium tanks, representing hundreds of thousands of yen in development costs and months in manufacturing effort, had been destroyed without damaging a single Allied vehicle. Japanese infantry, witnessing the destruction of their armored support from 600 yards away, began withdrawing before even reaching Allied positions. The psychological impact was immediate and catastrophic. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The after-action reports filed by the 7th Light Cavalry on November 18th documented not just a tactical victory, but a fundamental shift in armored warfare dynamics. Lieutenant Colonel Whitfield's assessment was clinical. The Sherman Firefly possesses standoff capability that renders current Japanese armor tactically obsolete. Enemy tanks must close to effective range where they are vulnerable to destruction before achieving firing solutions. This creates a zone of absolute dominance between 600 and 1,200 yards where Japanese armor can be engaged with impunity. British intelligence officers examining the destroyed Chi-Nus tanks made detailed assessments of the damage patterns. Captain Robert Thornton, a Royal Armoured Corps technical officer, documented his findings in a report that would circulate through Allied command structures within days. The 17-pounder's penetration characteristics exceed all previous estimates. Against Japanese armor, there is no effective protection at any combat range. The Chi-Nus 50mm frontal armor provides no more resistance than the earlier Chi-Ha's 25mm plates. We are not fighting a superior tank, we are using a superior weapon. Japanese intelligence, piecing together reports from survivors and reconnaissance elements, began to grasp the magnitude of the problem. A signals intelligence intercept decoded on November 21st revealed a conversation between 2 Japanese armor commanders. New enemy tank variant has destroyed entire company in single engagement. No survivors from tank crews. Infantry reports enemy firing from ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Request immediate withdrawal of remaining armor until countermeasures developed. The countermeasures never materialized. Japanese industry, already struggling to maintain basic production levels under sustained Allied bombing, couldn't redesign tank armor or develop new weapons systems. The Chi-Nus represented the pinnacle of achievable Japanese tank development. There would be no answer to the Firefly. November 24, 1944. Allied forces launched Operation Extended Capital, the drive toward Manderlay. Sherman Fireflies, now integrated into standard tank formations at a ratio of 1 Firefly per 4 standard Shermans, provided overwatch for advancing columns. Japanese commanders, having received warnings about the new Allied tanks, ordered their armor to avoid engagement whenever possible. This defensive posture represented a complete reversal of Japanese armored doctrine. The psychological transformation was documented in captured Japanese orders. A directive from the 14th Tank Regiment, dated November 27th, stated, "Tank units will not engage enemy armor beyond 400 meters. Close rapidly using terrain masking. Accept casualties during approach to achieve firing range where our weapons can penetrate enemy armor. Night operations preferred to reduce enemy standoff advantage." These tactics, born of desperation, proved marginally more effective but ultimately futile. On December 3rd, near Pinlabu, a Japanese tank platoon attempted a dawn attack using morning fog to mask their approach. They achieved surprise, closing to within 300 yards of Allied positions before being detected. In the engagement that followed, 3 Chi-Nus tanks were destroyed within 90 seconds. The Firefly's crews had adapted, maintaining constant readiness and developing rapid engagement protocols. Tank Commander Subedar Ranjit from the 7th Light Cavalry described the engagement in his personal diary. Spotted movement at first light. Japanese tanks emerged from fog bank at close range. No time for careful aim. First shot missed, too rushed. Second shot hit target center mass. Tank brewed up immediately. Third enemy tank attempted to ram our position. Destroyed at 50 yards. The 17-pounder doesn't miss at that range. There's nowhere for them to hide. By mid-December, Japanese armor activity in Burma had decreased by over 70% compared to October levels. The few remaining Chi-Nus tanks were being held in reserve, their crews increasingly reluctant to commit to engagements where survival odds approached zero. Allied intelligence reports noted Japanese tanks were being dug into static defensive positions, essentially converted into pillboxes, an admission that mobile armored warfare was no longer viable. The strategic implications extended beyond Burma. Reports of the Firefly's effectiveness reached Japanese Imperial headquarters in Tokyo by early December. Planning for the defense of the home islands had assumed that Japanese armor, supported by prepared positions and intimate knowledge of terrain, could contest American landings effectively. The Burma reports shattered that assumption. If Japanese tanks couldn't survive in open terrain against Allied armor, how would they fare in the close terrain of Japanese home islands against an enemy with unlimited artillery and air support? December 18, 1944. The battle for Shuibo demonstrated the Firefly's impact on combined arms operations. Japanese forces had fortified the town extensively with infantry positions supported by 6 Chi-Nus tanks positioned in prepared defensive positions. Allied planners developed a deliberate approach. Fireflies would systematically eliminate Japanese armor from standoff range before infantry assaulted the town itself. The operation began at 0830 hours, with aerial reconnaissance confirming Japanese tank positions. By 0945 hours, Sherman Fireflies had maneuvered to positions offering clear fields of fire at ranges between 800 and 1100 yards. The Japanese tanks, dug in with only turrets exposed, presented difficult targets, but the 17-pounder's accuracy at extended range proved decisive. Between 1000 and 1130 hours, all 6 Chi-Nus tanks were destroyed without closing to effective firing range. Allied infantry entered Shuibo that afternoon against resistance that, while determined, lacked the armored support that might have made the defense sustainable. Post-battle interrogation of Japanese prisoners revealed the psychological impact of facing Fireflies. A tank sergeant captured at Shuibo, who had served in Manchuria and China before Burma, provided testimony that Allied intelligence found particularly significant. "We trained to fight American tanks. We studied their tactics, their ranges, their weaknesses. But these new tanks? They kill from distances we cannot even see clearly. My commander said it was like fighting ghosts. You hear the shot and your comrade's tank explodes. You never see the enemy who killed him." The testimony revealed something deeper than tactical frustration. It showed how the Firefly had broken the psychological contract that made armored warfare comprehensible to Japanese crews. Tank combat had always involved mutual risk. Both sides could kill each other, and victory went to those with better training, tactics, or courage. The Firefly eliminated mutuality. Japanese tanks were targets, not opponents. This realization was corroding Japanese armor morale throughout Burma. By January 1945, the transformation was complete. Japanese armor doctrine had evolved from aggressive mobile warfare to passive defense. Remaining tanks were being used as static pillboxes, their mobility advantage sacrificed in exchange for improved protection from prepared positions. But even this proved inadequate. On January 12, during operations near Minmu, a Firefly engaged and destroyed a dug-in Chi-Nus at 1,240 yards, the longest confirmed kill of the Burma campaign. The Japanese tank had been positioned in what its crew believed was an invulnerable hull-down position. The 17-pounder's trajectory was flat enough at that range that the turret remained vulnerable. One shot, one kill. Allied armor losses during this period fell dramatically. Between December 1944 and March 1945, the 7th Light Cavalry reported 0 Sherman losses to Japanese tank fire. Infantry casualties decreased as well. Without effective armor support, Japanese defensive positions became easier to reduce through conventional combined arms tactics. The Firefly hadn't just won tank versus tank engagements, it had broken the entire defensive system that Japanese forces had built around armored strongpoints. The strategic implications rippled through Allied planning for subsequent operations. The success in Burma demonstrated that Japanese armor, even their most advanced types, couldn't contest Allied dominance when confronted with superior gunnery technology. Planning for operations in the Philippines, Okinawa, and potentially the home islands incorporated lessons from the Firefly's performance. Japanese armor was reassessed from significant threat requiring dedicated anti-tank resources to minor obstacle manageable with standard combat procedures. March 1945 saw the final major armored engagement in Burma. Japanese forces, attempting to delay Allied advances toward Rangoon, committed their remaining armor reserve, 8 Chi-Nus tanks, to a counterattack near Meiktila. The engagement was brief and one-sided. 4 Sherman Fireflies, supported by standard M4s, destroyed all 8 Japanese tanks in 17 minutes. No Allied tanks were damaged. Japanese infantry, witnessing the annihilation of their armored support, began surrendering in unprecedented numbers, over 300 prisoners taken in a single day, many citing the futility of resistance without effective armor support. The last recorded Sherman Firefly engagement against Japanese armor in Burma occurred on March 28, 1945. A single Chi-Nus, apparently abandoned earlier and recrewed by desperate Japanese soldiers, attempted to ambush an Allied convoy. The tank was destroyed at 670 yards by a Firefly that had been trailing the convoy specifically as protection against such attacks. The Japanese crew, according to witnesses, never managed to fire their main gun. The post-war assessment of the Sherman Firefly's impact on Pacific armored warfare began almost immediately after Japan's surrender. British and American armor analysts conducted extensive studies of tank engagements throughout the Burma campaign. The statistics were remarkable. Between November 1944 and August 1945, Sherman Fireflies operating in Southeast Asia engaged Japanese armor in 47 documented encounters. The kill-to-loss ratio exceeded 30-1. More significantly, not a single Sherman Firefly was destroyed by Japanese tank fire during this period. The few Firefly losses that occurred resulted from mines, artillery, or mechanical failure, never from armor versus armor combat. Lieutenant General William Slim, commanding British forces in Burma, addressed the Firefly's contribution in his post-war memoirs. The introduction of the Sherman Firefly fundamentally altered the tactical calculus of armored operations. Japanese forces, which had shown consistent ability to adapt to Allied tactics throughout the war, found themselves confronting a weapon for which no tactical adaptation was possible. The combination of standoff range, penetrating power, and relative mobility created a weapon system that Japanese armor simply could not counter with available resources. The technical lessons learned from Firefly operations in Burma influenced post-war tank development across multiple nations. The principle of mounting the most powerful gun, practically achievable in a medium tank chassis, even at the cost of some internal space and ammunition capacity, became standard doctrine. Soviet, American, and British tank development in the immediate post-war period all reflected this philosophy. The era of good-enough tank guns had ended. The Firefly had demonstrated that overwhelming gun power provided decisive advantage. Japanese military analysts during post-war interrogations conducted by Allied technical intelligence teams provided remarkably candid assessments of the Firefly's impact. Colonel Hideki Suzuki, who had commanded Japanese armored forces in central Burma, testified, "Our tank development proceeded on the assumption that engagement ranges would be limited by terrain and tactical doctrine to 500 meters or less. The Chi-Nus was designed to be superior at those ranges. When we encountered enemy tanks engaging us effectively at twice that distance, our entire tactical framework collapsed. We had no counter-tactic because our weapons physically could not reach the enemy. It was not a question of skill or courage, it was simple physics." The psychological dimension of the Firefly's dominance proved as significant as its tactical effects. Post-war studies of Japanese tank crew morale revealed that by early 1945, assignment to tank units in Burma was considered effectively a death sentence. Crews understood intellectually that their vehicles couldn't compete with Allied armor. This knowledge corroded unit cohesion and combat effectiveness long before actual engagements occurred. Several documented cases existed of Japanese tank crews abandoning vehicles before contact with Allied forces, choosing to fight as infantry rather than face the certainty of death in their outmatched tanks. The relatively small number of Fireflies deployed, never more than 16 operational simultaneously in the Burma theater, had achieved disproportionate strategic impact. Allied commanders discovered that the presence of even one or two Fireflies in a tank formation fundamentally changed Japanese tactical behavior. Enemy armor would withdraw rather than engage, even when outnumbering Allied forces. This Firefly effect extended the weapon's influence far beyond its actual physical presence. Japanese intelligence couldn't reliably identify which Allied tanks were Fireflies until engagement occurred, by which time identification was irrelevant. The lessons from Burma informed Allied planning for the proposed invasion of Japan. Strategic planners assumed that Japanese armor would be concentrated in defense of home islands, potentially in greater numbers than encountered elsewhere in the Pacific. The Fireflies' demonstrated ability to destroy Japanese tanks at standoff ranges became a critical factor in casualty estimates. Plans called for deploying hundreds of Fireflies in the initial invasion waves, effectively guaranteeing Allied armor superiority regardless of the numbers of Japanese tanks committed to defense. The atomic bombings and subsequent Japanese surrender meant these plans were never implemented. But captured Japanese defensive documents examined after the war revealed that Japanese military planners had reached similar conclusions about the futility of using armor against Allied forces equipped with Fireflies. Some defensive plans actually called for holding armor in reserve until Allied forces moved beyond the range of naval gunfire support, a recognition that Japanese tanks couldn't operate effectively anywhere Allied armor could deploy. The technical documentation preserved in British War Office archives reveals aspects of Firefly operations in Burma that remained classified for decades after the war ended. Among these records, ammunition expenditure reports tell a striking story. Between November 1944 and March 1945, Sherman Fireflies in the Burma theater fired approximately 890 17-pounder armor-piercing rounds in combat. Of these, 287 rounds engaged armored targets. The hit probability at ranges exceeding 800 yards was documented at 73%, a figure that astounded post-war analysts who had estimated hit rates would be closer to 40% at such distances. This exceptional accuracy stemmed partly from superior optics and gun stabilization, but also from an unexpected source: crew selection and training protocols developed specifically for Firefly operations. Lieutenant Colonel Whitfield had recognized early that the 17-pounder's limited ammunition capacity, 77 rounds compared to the standard Sherman's 97, meant every shot needed to count. He instituted selection criteria that prioritized experienced gunners who had demonstrated consistent accuracy in previous engagements. The results of this selection process were documented in the 7th Light Cavalry's personnel records. Havildar Singh, who achieved the first Firefly kill on November 17th, had previously served as a gunner in North Africa and had documented 17 confirmed hits from 23 shots fired in combat before ever entering a Firefly. His selection wasn't random, it was deliberate matching of exceptional personnel to exceptional weapons. This pattern repeated across all Firefly crews. Average prior combat experience exceeded 18 months, compared to 6 months for standard Sherman crews. The psychological profile of Firefly crews also revealed interesting patterns. Medical officers attached to armored units noted that Firefly gunners reported lower stress levels than their counterparts in standard Shermans, despite higher value targets and greater tactical responsibility. The explanation, documented in psychiatric evaluations conducted in February 1945, centered on control and survivability. Firefly crews could engage enemies at ranges where return fire was ineffective. This created a perception of control over their fate that reduced combat stress, even though they faced more dangerous missions. Japanese intelligence efforts to counter the Firefly proved consistently ineffective, though not for lack of trying. Captured documents from Japanese 15th Army headquarters revealed multiple attempts to develop identification protocols for distinguishing Fireflies from standard Shermans at distance. The most elaborate scheme, developed in January 1945, called for reconnaissance teams to measure gun barrel length using calibrated optical devices. In theory, the Firefly's extended 17-pounder barrel would be identifiable at 1,500 yards. In practice, this proved useless. By the time Japanese observers could accurately measure gun barrel length, they were already within effective range of Firefly guns. More critically, Allied forces had begun applying camouflage techniques specifically designed to disguise the Firefly's distinctive barrel. Some crews attached false muzzle brakes to create visual confusion. Others wrapped the extended barrel in vegetation or canvas sleeves. Tank battalion records from February 1945 note that Japanese forces appear unable to distinguish Firefly tanks from standard Shermans until engagement commences. The few tactical successes Japanese forces achieved against Fireflies came not from superior tactics, but from extreme measures that proved unsustainable. On January 28, 1945, a Japanese suicide bomber, a soldier carrying a 22-pound explosive charge, successfully destroyed a Firefly near Moniwa by approaching through dense vegetation and detonating his charge against the tank's tracks. The explosion immobilized the tank and killed one crew member. It was the only documented instance of a Firefly being deliberately destroyed by Japanese ground forces in Burma. This incident prompted immediate tactical changes. Fireflies began operating with dedicated infantry escorts when advancing through close terrain. Tank commanders instituted 360-degree security protocols, with infantry specifically tasked with preventing close-range attacks. The modifications proved effective. No subsequent Firefly losses to suicide attacks occurred, though Japanese forces attempted the tactic at least 7 more documented times. The industrial logistics supporting Firefly operations in Burma represented a remarkable achievement in its own right. The 17-pounder ammunition, significantly larger and heavier than standard 75mm Sherman rounds, required dedicated supply chains. Each armor-piercing round weighed 17 pounds, compared to 14.6 pounds for 75mm rounds. Transportation, storage, and handling all required modifications to existing logistics infrastructure. By March 1945, the supply system was delivering approximately 1,200 rounds of 17-pounder ammunition weekly to Burma theater, sufficient to maintain combat operations while building reserve stocks. Maintenance presented unique challenges as well. The 17-pounder's high-pressure firing regime created barrel wear rates approximately 40% higher than standard tank guns. Gunnery records documented that barrel accuracy began degrading noticeably after 350 to 400 rounds fired. Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, REME units in Burma, maintained stocks of replacement barrels and developed rapid barrel change procedures that could swap a worn gun tube in under 6 hours, comparable to engine replacement in complexity but achievable in field conditions. The human cost of armored warfare in Burma, even with Firefly's superiority, remains significant in less obvious ways. Medical records from field hospitals treating tank crews revealed high rates of hearing damage from the 17-pounder's extreme muzzle blast. Many Firefly gunners and loaders suffered permanent hearing loss, particularly in their left ear, the side facing the breach during firing. Post-war disability claims filed by Firefly veterans consistently cited hearing impairment as a primary service-connected condition. The strategic deception value of the Firefly exceeded its tactical impact in some respects. Japanese forces, uncertain of how many Fireflies the Allies possessed, consistently overestimated their numbers. Captured intelligence assessments from February 1945 estimated Allied Firefly strength in Burma at approximately 60 to 80 vehicles, nearly 5 times actual deployment levels. This miscalculation influenced Japanese tactical planning, causing them to hold armor in reserve for fear of encountering overwhelming Firefly numbers. Armor that might have been committed to critical defensive battles instead remained static, contributing to Japanese defensive failures. The final statistical accounting of Firefly operations in Burma, compiled by British military historians in 1947, provided comprehensive assessment. 16 Firefly tanks operated in theater between November 1944 and August 1945. These vehicles participated in 47 armored engagements, destroyed at least 73 Japanese tanks, exact numbers remain uncertain due to incomplete Japanese records, and suffered 0 combat losses to enemy armor. 3 Fireflies were lost to mines, 1 to the suicide bomber attack, and 2 to mechanical failures that resulted in vehicles being abandoned and destroyed to prevent capture. The cost-benefit ratio, measured both in lives saved and resources expended, marked the Firefly as one of the most effective weapon systems deployed in the Pacific Theater.
The legacy of the Sherman Firefly's Pacific service extends far beyond the immediate military victory it helped achieve. In the broader context of World War II armored warfare, the Firefly represented a critical evolution in military thinking. The recognition that technological superiority, particularly in gunnery, could provide decisive advantage even when deployed in relatively small numbers. This principle would shape armored warfare doctrine for decades. Veterans of the Burma campaign who served in Firefly crews maintained lifelong connections to the weapon system. Annual reunions of the 7th Light Cavalry, held in India and Britain through the 1990s, featured surviving Firefly tanks as centerpieces. Veterans spoke with respect about the weapon's power, but also acknowledged the burden it imposed. Sergeant William Davies, who trained initial Firefly crews, reflected in a 1987 interview, "We knew we had an overwhelming advantage. That's not always as simple as it sounds. When you can kill the enemy from ranges where he can't fight back, you confront questions about fairness that don't arise in even combat. But war isn't fair, and our job was to win with minimum friendly casualties. The Firefly did that better than anything else we had." Japanese veterans, in their own post-war testimonies and memoirs, acknowledge the impact of the Firefly with professional respect. Former Chi-Nus commander Lieutenant Yamada, one of the few Japanese tank officers to survive multiple encounters with Fireflies, wrote in his 1963 memoir, "The British Firefly tank represented everything we had failed to achieve in our own armor development. It combined adequate mobility, good protection, and overwhelming firepower. We had focused on creating a balanced design with the Chi-Nus. The British had focused on killing enemy tanks. In war, the side that kills the enemy's tanks wins. This is the lesson we learned too late." The technical innovations pioneered with the Firefly, particularly the concept of mounting the most powerful practical gun in an existing chassis, influenced post-war tank development worldwide. The Soviet T-54 or 55 series, the American M47 and M48, and the British Centurion all reflected the philosophy that gun power was the primary determinant of tank effectiveness. The medium tank as a category evolved from balanced vehicle for multiple roles to mobile platform for the biggest gun we can mount. This evolution began with the Firefly. Modern military historians recognize the Sherman Firefly as one of the most cost-effective weapon systems of World War II. The conversion from standard Sherman to Firefly cost approximately 1/3 the price of producing a new tank from scratch, yet provided exponentially greater combat effectiveness against enemy armor. In Burma, fewer than 20 Fireflies neutralized Japanese armored capability across an entire theater of operations. The return on investment, measured in both economic and military terms, was extraordinary. The preserved Sherman Fireflies in military museums worldwide stand as testament to the weapon's significance. The Bovington Tank Museum in Britain, the Imperial War Museum, and the National War Museum in New Zealand all display Firefly tanks. Educational placards describe their technical specifications, but they often miss the human dimension. The Japanese tank crews who faced an enemy that couldn't fight, the Allied crews who bore the burden of overwhelming advantage, and the thousands of infantry on both sides whose fates were shaped by these armored duels. The mathematics of the Firefly's dominance were brutally simple. The 17-pounder could penetrate any Japanese tank at ranges where Japanese guns couldn't return fire effectively. This created a zone of absolute control, a killing ground where one side could destroy the other with virtual impunity. Modern military terminology would call this standoff precision strike capability. In 1944, soldiers simply called it devastating. The Sherman Firefly in Burma proved a fundamental truth about industrial warfare. Victory flows not merely to the brave, but to those who bring superior tools to the fight. Japanese tank crews were courageous, well-trained, and determined, but courage cannot deflect armor-piercing shot traveling at 2,900 feet per second. Training cannot overcome a 600-yard range disadvantage. Determination cannot alter the physics of armor penetration. The Firefly demonstrated that in modern warfare, technology multiplied by industrial capacity equals victory, regardless of human factors on the opposing side. The final assessment perhaps belongs to the soldiers who fought on both sides. At a 1985 reunion in Rangoon bringing together British and Japanese veterans, a former Firefly commander and a former Chi-Nus commander met for the first time since the war. Through translators, they discussed the engagements they'd survived. The Japanese veteran asked directly, "Did you feel guilt having such advantage?" The British veteran considered the question carefully before responding, "I felt relief. Relief that I would go home. Relief that my crew would survive. War isn't sport. There's no obligation to give the enemy an even chance. I'm not proud of the advantage we had, but I'm grateful for it." Today, the caves and valleys of Burma where these armored duels occurred are peaceful. Local farmers sometimes uncover rusted tank components in their fields, fragments of Chi-Nus destroyed 80 years ago. These artifacts serve as reminders of when technological superiority proved decisive, when 17-pound shots traveling at hypersonic velocity transformed the nature of armored warfare, and when Japanese tank doctrine met British gunnery and discovered that courage, however great, cannot overcome physics. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.